Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Living Longer, Living Well, Expert Advice to Enable Healthy Aging. My name is Mary Varakis with the Chang School, Program Manager with the Chang School's Programs for 50 Plus and Community Engagement. And along with Deborah Bonk-Greenwood, who is the Executive Director of our collaborative partner, the Life Institute at Ryerson University. We're very excited and looking forward to today's special presentation. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the land on which Ryerson University is built upon. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples, elders, and ancestors who stewarded and cared for the nature and people who lived on the land where Ryerson is located today. At the university, we have made a deep and long-lasting commitment to truth and reconciliation, but there remains much work to be done. I invite you to learn more about this ongoing work online. Now, I'd like to take to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's workshop. Your microphone is muted throughout the workshop so as not to disturb other attendees or the presenter. Your webcam will not be accessible during this workshop as it is a webinar format. For the hearing impaired, we have automated captioning available, which you can access by activating it in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You will have an opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the chat box of the control panel. You may send in your questions when prompted by Deborah Bonk-Greenwood, who will be facilitating the Q&A session today at the end of today's presentation. Please note that the opinions expressed in the event today by the speaker and do not necessarily express the views or opinions of Ryerson University. The information presented in this workshop is for general information purposes only. I would now like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Samir K. Sinha, for today's workshop. Dr. Samir Sinha is a passionate and respected advocate for the needs of older adults. Dr. Sinha currently serves as the Director of Geriatrics of the Sinai Health and the University Health Network in Toronto, and the Peter and Shelagh Godsoe Chair in Geriatrics at Mount Sinai Hospital, as well as the Director of Health Policy Research at the National Institute of Aging at Ryerson University. He is also an associate professor in the Departments of Medicine, Family and Community Medicine, and the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation at the University of Toronto, and an assistant professor of medicine at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. A Rhodes Scholar after completing his undergraduate medical studies at the University of Western Ontario, he obtained a master's in medical history and a doctorate in sociology at the University of Oxford's Institute of Aging. He has pursued his postgraduate training in internal medicine at the University of Toronto and in geriatrics at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Dr. Sinha began his clinical career working as a long-term care physician in Baltimore, Maryland, before returning to Canada in 2010. In 2012, he was appointed by the Government of Ontario to serve as the expert lead of Ontario's senior strategy, through which he led and participated in several comprehensive reviews of Ontario's long-term care services over the years. In 2019, he launched a comprehensive review of long-term care services across Canada and around the world for the National Institute of Aging. In 2014, Canada's Maclean magazine proclaimed him to be one of Canada's 50 most influential people and its most compelling voice for the elderly. Welcome, Dr. Sinha. It's wonderful to have you here with us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Mary, and to the team from Ryerson. So it's great to be here and to be part of the Medical Monday series. I think I'm the final speaker of the series, and I was asked to kind of deliver this talk that I like to call 10 Myths and Realities About Aging and How to Live to 100. And really it focuses on this notion of how can we really support ourselves to basically live longer and live well. And so really an opportunity for me to provide some expert advice to enable healthy aging. So that's what we're here to do today. We're going to have some fun, and we're going to try out a bit of an interactive format, because sometimes these sessions can be a bit challenging if you're just listening to someone speak. So I really want to see if we can do some audience participation today with 10 quiz questions. So if you are like, wait a minute, we didn't think we were going to be a quiz, then you can sign off now. But I see that people are still staying with us, and so that's what's great. So our presentation objectives for today are really to identify and dispel some of the common myths around aging and the process of aging itself. I want us to help understand what aging is all about, and understand the things that we can do to stay healthy and independent for as long as possible, and understand what the current scientific evidence suggests we do to prevent the development of dementias as well. So first of all, when we think about human aging, people say like, wait, when does aging begin, right? You know, aging is something for older people, but I always want to remind people that aging begins at birth, right? You know, as soon as you come out of your mother's womb, you know, there you go, right? You are aging literally by the second, by the minute, by the day. And when you think about how people evolve over time, you have to realize that, you know, how we age is often influenced by a composite of biological, psychological, social, functional, and spiritual factors. All those sorts of things will influence us as we age, and the people that we become. And of course, therefore, it really varies from person to person. So that's really an important aspect, because it's really important for us to try and appreciate that all of us have had different lived experiences, and that will certainly influence and affect us as we age. But certainly, you know, the food that we've eaten, kind of the activities that we've done, how much we exercise and take care of ourselves, all these sorts of things can influence us, including our genetics as well. So I want to really get underway with our quiz here, and Brian's going to help us out by helping us do some yes/no quizzes here. So we'll get used to this technology and try and figure it out. But here's the first question. Basically, it's kind of a true or false, a yes or no, if you will. So is it very difficult for older adults to learn new things? Yes or no? So please go ahead and vote, and I'm going to vote as well. I can't vote. There you go. So I can't help folks out. So perfect. So okay. So if people are getting used to that, you just want to click yes or no. And Brian, let's see the results. Perfect. So so the question, so the majority of people said no, it's very difficult for people to learn new things. So let me do this. So, and that's correct, right? The majority said no, it's not. It's certainly not difficult for older people to learn new things. Well, but 25% of the respondents said yes, it is. And this is one of those interesting kind of notions out there that, you know, people often say, oh, well, you know, you give grandma or grandpa, or you give me, frankly, that new remote control, and it's that they can't figure it out, and so on. So that means that it's hard to teach older people new things. It's not that it's necessarily hard to teach older people new things. It's the notion that what we're not familiar with can be harder for us to learn. But fundamentally, if someone takes the time to teach us how to do something, then we actually have the capacity to learn. It may take us a little bit longer, and especially if there's something that's a bit unfamiliar, but older people certainly who have a normal level of cognition, they certainly can definitely learn new things. And we have to respect that, and we have to appreciate that when someone's struggling to learn a new thing, it might not be because they can't. It just may be that we're not doing a good job of helping them understand or learn that new thing as well. Okay, here's our next one. So memory loss is a normal part of aging. True or false? So we'll put up the poll question again. And again, we'll give people like 10 seconds. And you want to just choose yes or no. Is memory loss a normal part of aging? Okay, let's see the answer here. Okay, so we had 68% say yes and about 32% say no. Okay, so what's the answer here? So the answer is yes, actually. So here's the key thing is that actually it's not uncommon to have what we call normal age-related memory loss. So this is basically, as we get older, it's more common that we might have what we call seniors moments, for example. So it's like, what was the name of that person? Or I forgot that thing that I was supposed to put on my list, and so on. So we always have that no matter what age we are, but it is not uncommon to have a bit more of that occurring. And that's what we call normal age-related memory loss. However, what is not normal is when you start having trouble with your memory, that it starts impacting your function, your ability to do things like remember your appointments, remember to take your medications, to pay bills, to do sorts of things like that. When your memory problems are interfering with your ability to do your day-to-day tasks, that's what we start to call a dementia. But if you have memory challenges, but you're able to do all your tasks, that's not dementia. That's could be either what we call normal age-related memory loss, or it could be something called mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is a condition. It's not a mild dementia, but it's a condition where people complain about their memory or thinking. They might meet with someone like me who does a memory quiz with them, or their family doctor does a memory quiz and say, yeah, you actually have some problems with your memory and thinking based on this quiz, but it's not interfering with your ability to do your day-to-day functioning and your day-to-day tasks. So that's how it's important to kind of understand. But again, memory loss can be a normal part of aging, but only when it starts interfering with your ability to do things. That's when we need to really get concerned. And certainly if you are concerned about your memory, do see your primary care provider, who can start walking you through next steps, because sometimes a vitamin deficiency, for example, like a low B12 level, maybe something's off with your thyroid, maybe you're on too many medications that are making you drowsy or confused, or maybe you might be suffering from depression or anxiety. All those things can interfere with our memory as we get older. So it's good that if you're concerned about your memory or the memory of a loved one, to see your primary care provider to see what might need to be done. Okay, let's get on to the next question. Okay, are older adults at higher risk for HIV and AIDS? Let's put up the question. I accidentally might have leaked the result, but this is always a fun one to do. So yes or no, are older adults at higher risk for developing HIV/AIDS? Okay, I've snuck the answer in there, but let's see what the response is. Okay, interesting. So this is actually funny. See, even though I gave everybody the response, people might have thought I was trying to trick them there, and 77% said that no. Well, actually, the smaller group that said yes are absolutely correct. So older adults are at higher risk for HIV/AIDS, and people are like, what do you mean? Why would older people be at higher risk for this? Well, actually, we know that older adults are one of the fastest growing groups for new, what we call sexually transmitted infections, including things like HIV or AIDS. You're like, why is that? Well, a lot of people think that as we get older, maybe there might be older women out there who are saying, well, I can't get pregnant, so no need to use protection. But again, the key is that it's not just about protecting someone against pregnancy, it's about protecting someone from a sexually transmitted infection. So one of the fastest growing groups for new syphilis infections, older people. Gonorrhea and chlamydia, older people. HIV/AIDS, older people. And so I always say, no matter who you are, no matter who you love, especially in this month of Pride, remember that I always say, no glove, no love. And you have to make sure that you're always trying to practice safe sex. So it's not that you shouldn't be having sex, it's just making sure that you're always being safe, and being careful, because again, these are issues, especially in our older populations. Okay, so good, we're learning things, I hope, as we get through this. Okay, so the next slide is, or the next question is, does high blood pressure increase with age? So we'll put up our poll again, and we'll do a yes or no. Does high blood pressure increase with age? Okay, let's see what our responses are. Okay, so 65% said yes, and those people are absolutely correct. So people say, well, why does high blood pressure increase with age? Why do we actually see that over time? And the key is, the way I like to explain it to my patients is you want to think about your blood vessels as kind of like pipes. So when we're born, we have these nice clean pipes because we have a brand new house. There's no junk in them. But over time, we know that older pipes, they've got junk building up in them. And you can think of that as calcium. You can think of that as cholesterol. And over time, those pipes get stiff. And when those blood vessels, when our arteries get stiffer and stiffer, imagine now it's actually harder, especially as they get thicker and thicker over time. It's harder to actually get blood passing through as easily. So our heart now starts having to pump and pump and pump with greater levels of pressure or blood pressure so that we can get blood and oxygen up to our brain, up to our fingers, up to our toes, for example. And that's why we actually start seeing a higher level of blood pressure as we age. Think of those pipes getting older, thinking of them getting more calcified, more cholesterol, and all those sorts of things. So that's why the #1 chronic condition in older people is actually high blood pressure. I have a 92-year-old right now who he has just developed high blood pressure for the first time. And so now, and it just came on all of a sudden. It came on with the appearance of a stroke, for example. So now we're having to match that. We started with 1 medication, now we're on 2, and trying to help at. The oldest person I've diagnosed new high blood pressure in, 100-year-old. So again, they went 100 years without high blood pressure, and after they turned 100, that's when it snuck up on them. So make sure that you're keeping an eye on your blood pressure. A good tip is, if you ever visit the pharmacy and they have that blood pressure machine, stick your hand in that cuff whenever you see, your primary care provider. Just ask them to keep an eye on your blood pressure, because again, it may have been normal for all your life. It might have been low for part of your life, but as we get older, it's not uncommon for people to develop higher blood pressure. And again, you want to treat high blood pressure because it's one of the #1 reasons why people can develop cardiovascular disease like heart attacks and strokes. And that's certain, and also dementia as well. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, let's get on to the next question. Okay, oh my goodness, I'm giving answers out here. Okay, osteoporosis is a normal part of the aging process for women. So true or false? Is this a true or false? Osteoporosis is a normal part of the aging process for women. True or false? Okay, and let's see the answer to this one. Perfect. Okay, so people are a bit mixed. We have 46% saying yes, 54% saying no. So what do we need to know about our bones and bone health? Well, the key thing is that we have to remember is that our bones are at our bodies are at their peak bone and muscle mass. So our bones and our muscles are their strongest kind of in our late 20s. And as you creep up to that age, for example, our bones are getting stronger. And beyond our late 20s, our bones are starting to get naturally weaker. That's something that we call osteopenia, or a weakening of our bones, or sarcopenia, which is a weakening of our muscles. That's why, we appreciate that as we get older, it becomes harder to lift things, to push things, to pull things. Our strength is a bit diminished. So think about that as weaker muscles and weaker bones. And that's why we have that common phrase called move it or lose it. If you're not keeping physically active, for example, if you're not kind of keeping those bones and muscles kind of well utilized, for example, they can start to wither, with time. And that thinning of our bones and that thinning of our muscles, for example, can lead us to be a bit more weak and a bit more frail. Osteoporosis is what we call when our bones get so weak, for example, that they put us at high risk of fracturing. So it's a very common condition in older women. It's not a normal part of aging. Osteopenia, sarcopenia is a normal part of the aging process for women and men. Osteoporosis, you shouldn't consider it as a normal part of the aging process, but it certainly is what happens when our bones and our bones become too weak. And about 1 in 4 men will experience osteoporosis, but 1 in 2 women will actually experience osteoporosis. So what we do recommend is that as we get older, making sure you're getting enough calcium in your diet, for example. So for example, that can come from as easy as 3 glasses of milk or 3 pots of yogurt a day, for example. So you can get calcium from dairy sources. There are other foods that are rich in calcium as well. And some people who just don't drink milk or don't eat cheese or other dairy products or foods that are rich in calcium, we might encourage them to take calcium supplement, and some people just chew on Tums, or they take what we call a calcium carbonate tablet or two. And then we also recommend that people are getting enough vitamin D. And people say, how much vitamin D should I get? Vitamin D, we say about 1,000 units a day. But again, you know, your primary care provider can advise what's right for you, for example. And again, think about vitamin D and calcium as the bricks and mortar. They're the bricks and mortar that you need to build a strong house, for example. And if you're not having enough calcium and vitamin D on board, these are all things that contribute to weaker bones over time. But the other thing that you can do to keep your bones strong is by basically doing exercises that actually strengthen your bones. And strengthening exercises can be as simple as going for a walk. When you're walking, you're actually improving the strength of your bones. It's not about pumping iron in a gym. It's doing any form of exercise that you're willing to do. Those sorts of things can actually help you to strengthen your bones and your muscle mass over time. Okay, so let's go to the next question. So does physical strength decline? Physical strength declines in old age. Is that true or false? And we talked a little bit about that already. So let's see if people were listening. Okay, there's 315 of you. So does physical strength decline in older age? Okay, true or false? Let's see what the answer is to this. Okay, so, okay, people are listening. Okay, the message is getting through. So we all know this inherently, that physical strength does decline in older age, but that's again why we have to remember that phrase, move it or lose it again. So people always say, Dr. Sinha, what is the right type of exercise I should be doing as I get older? And my answer is always the exercise you're most likely to do. So if you do not like to row, then don't row, for example. If you don't like to run, don't run. If you don't want to go to the gym, don't go to the gym. But if you like to go for a walk, do a good walk. And how much exercise should we be getting? Well, the exercise, we actually have Canadian guidelines for exercise for both older adults and younger adults. And you know what? For older adults or younger adults, same thing. It's 150 minutes a week, or better yet, you can say 5 times a week for 30 minutes. And this is where you want to get doing exercise that, you know, gives you a bit of a huff, you know, makes you a bit sweat, gets you a bit of a sweat, for example. That's kind of the endurance that you want with the exercise that you'll do. Okay, so let's see where we're at. So that one was true, and 95% of you got that, so that's great. So why would my patient, Mr. W, prefer this park bench? Why do older people tend to prefer this park bench as we age? Let's see if we can get some comments going in the chat box, if any of you want to use that. So let's put some thoughts. Why would an older person? Yes, example, the harms helper to get exactly. You got it. Okay, people are like all over this. This is great. Perfect. Thank you. So again, it's that idea that again, as we get older, you know, often our biggest muscles in our body are our glutes, or they are our glutes. They are our quads. So the muscles in our legs, in our butts, and in our thighs, basically. And so those are the muscles, for example, that allow me, just doing this, I can get up and out of my chair, for example, without actually. But if I have weaker muscles, those two biggest muscle groups, if they're kind of weak, now you know that I have arms on my chair, and I'm just basically using extra muscles for my arms to help lift myself up. So it's a great test for you to do. So if you basically just cross your arms and get up and out of a chair, if you can do that, then it means that your glutes and your quads are pretty good. But if you're struggling a little bit, if you're finding more and more over time, I've got to use the arms on my chair to get up and get out of get around, for example, that means that you probably should be doing some more strength exercises as well. So I think that's important. Now, someone just put in the chat, what would you consider as an older adult? 50 plus, 55 plus, 60 plus? You know, I honestly, I always think that age is just a number, but what I would say is that we know that once you start getting older than 55, for example, that's when we know our body's going through significant changes, and it's changes that are different from being the average adult to an older adult, because we know that's when our immune system starts to become more weaker as we age, and hence why we know that older people are more likely to suffer from some infections. And the best example that we have right now is with our pandemic and COVID-19. We know that 95% of our deaths that have occurred in Canada to date have been amongst people 60 and older, particularly because older adults have a weaker immune system, and a virus like COVID-19 really can prey on older adults, for example. That's why vaccination is so important for older adults, but that's why older adults are eligible for a number of particular vaccines against shingles, against tetanus, against influenza, against pneumonia. And it's really important to make sure that we start thinking. So again, someone said, no one's old, but the reality is that as we get older than 55, we know that our immune system starts to weaken. And these are things that we need to consider with time, because this is where we need to be more mindful of our muscle mass as well. So let me just make sure. I'm just going to ask my co-host, can you still see my slides, or have I?
We still see your screen, but it's not full screen.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to reshare, so just give me a second here. We're going to go back to the presentation here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back into presentation mode. Okay, so I think we're back. And Brian, are we seeing the correct slide?
Yes, we're seeing the park bench.
Brilliant. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's get back to work, folks. Okay, all 5 senses tend to decline with advancing age. True or false? So let's put up our poll, and the answer is yes or no. All 5 senses tend to decline with advancing age. True or false? Yes or no? Okay, let's see where we're at with this one. Okay, so the answer, 78% say yes, and I believe this answer is true. So let's go to say yes, exactly. So basically, the way I like to think of this is just think of your senses as we get older, we all experience mileage, for example, right? So you start thinking about our hearing, our vision, kind of even say our touch of sense, for example. All these sorts of things can decline as we get older, even our sense of taste, for example. And so it's important to always make sure that we're being mindful of this, because there are things that we can do. Again, if your vision is becoming poorer with age, make sure that you get it checked out, because again, 25% of older adults have serious visual concerns, such as things like cataracts, glaucoma, macular degeneration. These are things that can often be treatable and manageable, as we age, for example. Hearing loss, it's actually hearing loss and poor hearing can increase your risk of falls. It can actually increase your risk of developing a dementia. So again, it's one of these reasons why we would recommend that if you're having hearing challenges, is to get your hearing checked and seeing what you can do to improve it. And sometimes that's about hearing rehabilitation. Sometimes that might need to use a hearing aid, for example. And for some of my patients who describe that things don't taste as good as they used to, for example, sometimes you can use what we call flavor enhancers, more spice or other things that you can sprinkle on your food to just really boost up the taste, because again, it's not uncommon that taste can diminish as we age. And if you're feeling decreased sensation in your fingers or your toes, again, talk to your doctor, because sometimes that can be related to a vitamin deficiency, like too low of a B12 level, for example, or other conditions like diabetes and other things that can also kind of advance those things. So our senses do decline, but again, it's important to make sure that we manage them where we can, so they can keep us healthy and independent for as long as possible. Okay, so this is also an example of kind of what it's like to have normal vision versus what it's like to be living with a cataract versus what it's like to be living with age-related macular degeneration, or what it's like if you're living with glaucoma. So sometimes it's hard for us to really appreciate what that might what that might be like for an older person, or just for anybody in general who might have this condition at a younger age. But it's really important that we do, especially if you have friends who might have these conditions, because it can help empathize, help us empathize what they might be going through and why they sometimes need special accommodation so that they can see things or participate in things as easily as the rest of us as well. Okay, here's one. Most 80-year-old drivers are quite capable of safely operating a motor vehicle. This is always controversial, but yes or no? What do we think? Are most 80-year-old drivers quite capable of safely operating a motor vehicle? Okay, let's see what our answer is here. And the answer is 60% say yes, but 40% say no. Well, the answer actually is that yes, indeed, most people, most 80-year-olds are quite capable of safely operating a motor vehicle. Now, there's always these jokes out there and these thoughts that older people are terrible drivers. Well, the most terrible drivers tend to be people in their 20s who are just recent new drivers as well. Older adults tend to be incredibly safe drivers, for example. But as we know, if you start having trouble with your hearing, your vision, your manual dexterity, these are all things that can affect our ability to drive safely. But the biggest issue that we get concerned about as we get older and beyond the age of 80 in particular could be the onset of dementia. This is why you'll sometimes see that after age 80, there is a requirement that older people do kind of a driving test, for example, where they are asked to kind of draw a clock or find the H's, for example. If you're in Ontario, find the H's in that diagram. And those are things to actually look at what we call visual spatial reasoning, how well people can see and interpret kind of their environments. Because it's that with dementias like Alzheimer's disease or other ones, it can be both memory concerns and it can also be problems of visual spatial reasoning. And that's why driving can be particularly dangerous. Not the idea that people forget where they're going, but more it can be around people not being able to interpret visual cues and things as well. But if people don't have this, right, then they can very much safely operate a vehicle. And if people are interested, one of my favorite videos on YouTube is one called "I Like Being 98." And it's about a 97-year-old who actually had her license taken away years earlier. And then when a friend of hers in need in her retirement village actually needed to have a ride to be able to go get groceries or so on, this 97-year-old went back, passed her driving exam, was able to demonstrate that she could safely drive, and was able to resume driving just so she could help her best friend get to the grocery store. So it's a lovely video, and maybe after this I can put it in the chat in case you want a little bit of a giggle and a reminder of what amazing 98-year-olds can do for sure. Okay, the next question is older females, older women exhibit better healthcare practices than older males. True or false? Let's see what people say here. Okay, so we'll give this a few moments. Do older women exhibit better healthcare practices than older men? Okay, let's see what the result is here. Okay, yeah, there's no debate here. 93% basically say that women tend to practice are better at their healthcare practices than older men. Yeah, and this is just kind of a common thing, and people say, why is that? And I think that women tend to interact with the healthcare system more throughout their lives. Men tend to avoid it throughout, between being children and being older adults and so on. And so we do know that often we can take a page out of the books of women is to kind of think about our bodies, understand, what might be changing. And again, how do we need to adequately address issues at hand so we can better take care of ourselves? And remember that as we get older, we want to think about health and wellness, wellness and prevention. Are my medications right? Are there things that I can remove? Are there things I should be on? Are there medical conditions that I need to be aware of that I might not have been screened for, like high blood pressure? Am I taking the right vitamins and minerals that I might need, for example, like to strengthen my bones, and other things? Have I had the right vaccinations? These are all things that we need to be thinking about, because the more we pay attention to these issues, the better we age over time. Okay. And here's the final question, I believe. The aging process can be defeated. True or false? Do we think the aging process can be defeated? So we'll give a moment for this and see where we land. Okay, let's see where we get. True or false? The aging process can be defeated, and the answer is, oh, interesting. Okay, so 66% say no, but 34%, they're still looking for the fountain of youth. Well, my friends, I have to say that, for the last hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years, people have been searching for that immortal fountain of youth, and they've only come across the fountain of age. We cannot defeat the aging process. This is something that happens with age. The key is what we can do is there's many things that we can do to try and age healthy and well over time. And so we can't defeat what will naturally happen. We can't turn back the clock on our birthdays, but we can certainly try and age as best as possible. This was one of my oldest patients. I looked after her in Moose Factory, Ontario. She was affectionately known as Granny Wabanow. She was actually at the time the oldest residential school survivor in Canada, and this is Indigenous History Month right now. And so when I went to the community a few times, I was asked by Granny if I would be her geriatrician. She actually had a 35-year incredible history as a midwife working along the James Bay coastal communities. And I actually took one of my trainees along with me on this particular trip. And Dr. Krause, I was trying to get her, she's actually from Northern Ontario, and I wanted her to get interested in geriatrics. And after this, after meeting Granny, she's like, I'm hooked. This is what I want to do. And she's now a geriatrician practicing in Northern Ontario, back in the hometown and community where she grew up. So again, an amazing people that you get to meet with incredible lived experiences. But again, one who certainly was always mindful of what she did. She stayed quite active right up until the end, and to age in her own home for as long as possible. Okay. So what are some of the secrets to a long and healthy, happy life? Well, here's a few slides, and then we'll certainly get into questions. So living to very advanced ages will be the experience for many of us. So we know that life expectancy at age 65. So if those of you who've made it to 65, congratulations. And you have about 20 years of extra years of life ahead of you for the average Canadian man or woman. And so because of that, we know that the majority of those extra years are going to be in relatively good health. Apologies for the drilling behind me if you can hear that. So the chance that our later years will be ones where we will be living with dementia does increase with age. And the great news is that with advances in managing our vascular health issues, we are seeing less people living with dementia than we expected. So now the fact that we have better treatments for things like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, for example, that people are taking better care of their hearts and their vascular risk factors, we're actually seeing a smaller number of cases of dementia than we anticipated seeing, say, 10, 20 years ago as well. So the secrets to a longer life. So if you're 45 years or old and do all of these things rather than none, this one study predicted that you will live longer by 7 years for men and by 11 years for women. And this talks about getting a good night's sleep, making sure that you manage your weight, so you're not overweight too much and you're not too underweight, that you're getting sufficient exercise. We talked about that. You're limiting your alcohol. Notice that's not saying not having any alcohol, but it does say non-smoking. So again, if you're smoking, you might want to think about giving that up, or you should think about giving that up. And eating breakfast and seldom snacking. So these are what this one study found a number of years ago. So another study said you're going to have a 3.3 fold greater chance to age successfully if you participate in doing physical activity. So in this one, they said 2.5 hours, so that's about 150 weeks, 150 minutes a week of moderate or greater than an hour a week of vigorous exercise. Again, never smoking, moderating your alcohol consumption, and eating fruits and vegetables daily. And then this another study basically said if you're 75 years of age and do all these things rather than none, you will live longer by 5.5 years. So again, for those of you who might be older viewers who are saying, I'm older than 75, I guess I missed the boat. You haven't missed the boat, because again, in this study that was done where they followed something like 17,000 older people in the Nordic countries, they found that regular physical activity, again, not smoking, and this was a cool one, making meaningful social connections, so staying socially connected to other people. So having a buddy, for example, that you can connect with in a meaningful way, at least on a once a week basis, doing that with more friends, and that means that we have things to look forward to, things to actively contribute to one another, and we can live a healthier and active life. This last one was basically some work that some of you may have heard of, this idea of blue zones. And Dan Buettner, who was a reporter for National Geographic, he did this study where he basically looked at seeing where were these places in the world where people were living exceptionally long lives. And he found about 5 or 6 zones around the world, and places like Sardinia, the Seventh-day Adventists who live in Loma Linda, California, finding a place in Costa Rica, for example, and other places, and Okinawa, Japan. And he basically said these were some of the 7 things he saw. The idea that people were moving naturally. They were, not necessarily going lifting out weights, for example, but they were walking up and down hills. They were just getting out there in their communities and doing their things. One was saying basically avoid meat and processed foods and don't overeat, for example. That's what that hachibu, I think, is a Japanese term, kind of referring to that idea that only eat 80% of what's on your plate in this case. Drink red wine, but he's saying in moderation. Ikigai, which is a Japanese word, or another one, plan de vida, which is like why I wake up in the morning, having a sense of purpose. And so interestingly, this Dan would interview people and said, as a 98-year-old, my what I wake up for every morning is to think about what I can do to support my great-granddaughter, for example, to help her read, to help her learn, do these sorts of things. So find something that brings you joy and happiness. It's your sense of purpose, so you can get involved in it. Take time to relieve stress. Participate in a spiritual community, whatever that might want to be. It doesn't mean you have to belong to a religious community, but more something that, it's a community where you can be a part of, and make family a priority, congregate those who share your values, for example. So find your group, and the Life Institute is one of these incredible groups, over 2,500 older people who've been hanging out, do really cool things like learning together, and hopefully soon hanging out in person once again. These are amazing ways in which, again, is a great example of finding a community. And how can we prevent dementia? Well, people say, is it, word games? Is it if I do those Sudoku, for example, or if I do these crossword puzzles, that will help me prevent dementia, right? Well, the only clear scientific evidence to prevent the development of dementia is by basically doing these 2 things. Getting some regular exercise, we talked about that, 150 minutes a week, whatever exercise you're likely to do, and ensure your blood pressure is in good order, right? Not too low, not too high. And again, so just checking in on this, because again, when your blood pressure is too high and out of control, it means that blood pressure is pounding your brain and it's hurting those brain cells, and can negatively affect. So that's why I say, sadly, brain games, while fun, are still not effective ways to prevent the development of dementias as well. So again, but they'll make you very good at those games. So if that's your objective, do that. But if you say, should I spend 10 minutes playing this game of Sudoku, or should I go for a walk? The answer is always going to be go for a walk. Okay. So this was Mr. W. This was one of my patients, and you saw another patient at the beginning, Mrs. K. Mrs. K I cared for till the age of 98 in her own home. Mr. W was one of my very first patients when I moved to Toronto. I met him at the tender age of 99. I got to hang out with him. This is around the time of his 100th birthday. That's why you see the between the 2 of us, you see this little birthday card that his family had sent him. And Mr. W is one of these people who taught me a lot about life, but one who very much wanted to stay at home for as long as possible. You can see how well read he was as a gentleman. You see all these different sorts of books that came out from this person who never stopped learning. He learned to use a computer when he was 93 years of age, for example. Well into his hundreds, he was always surfing the internet. He would travel every day to a new country by the internet, and he had a lot to teach a lot of us until he died died at the age of 104 and 11 months, being able to reside in his home almost to the end right there. So some concluding thoughts for you. So we are all likely to live longer than we may have expected. Aging is a normal process, but one that we can make more enjoyable and less arduous by taking care of ourselves along the way. So don't smoke, eat and drink well, but not too well. Stay active, watch your BP, stay connected, and get vaccinated, okay? And I want you to enjoy your golden years ahead. So now I think we've got time for questions, and I'm going to go back to I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to go into the chat here, and I'm more than happy. And I think someone's already asking, will you be sending a link to the video? I missed the first bit. I believe that this is being recorded, so I think the answer is going to be yes. And then I can just start working through the questions that are coming through the chat, if that makes sense, Deborah.
That's fine, or else I'll start at the beginning. And there's one that was right at the beginning of your presentation.
Why don't you take it away, Deborah? I will let you pepper me with questions, and I will concentrate on answering them as well as I.
Thank you. Can extra calcium lead to a calcification of arteries?
It's a great question, right? So again, people say, hey, so you talked to us about these pipes getting a bit thick and rusty with calcium, if you will. So why would I take calcium if calcium is bad? So it's an excellent question. So here's the thing is, now we need calcium in our diets to continually build bones, right? When we're babies, what are we drinking? It's basically milk, either our mother's milk or someone else's milk. We are getting a ton of calcium, which we need to help build those bones, but we need calcium throughout our lives because it's an important mineral that we need to function so many aspects of our body, but also to keep our bones strong. So we absolutely need calcium, and the key is if you're not getting enough in your regular diet, which is about 1,000 milligrams of elemental calcium a day, then that's where you might need to supplement with calcium. But again, you don't want too little calcium, you don't want too much, for example. So we used to basically say that people should take up to 1,500 milligrams of calcium by supplementing a day. We've now realized that that's a bit too much. So that's why we talk about 1,000 milligrams of elemental calcium a day. If you're drinking milk, for example, that will not give you kidney stones, by the way. Some people always think, does dairy actually create kidney stones? It doesn't actually. It actually reduces your risk of kidney stones, believe it or not, from calcium, that is. And again, calcium, again, think about how much you're getting in your diet, and then you can determine whether you need to supplement beyond that as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Dr. Sinha. All right. The next question would be, what would you consider as older adults? 50 plus, 55 plus, 60 plus?
Yeah, so again, the idea is, so I answered that question a bit already in terms of people saying, okay, what do we think, or what would you consider an older person, for example? Again, some people just say it's just a matter of age. Really, as a geriatrician, I tend to see people who are 65 and older, and generally because I tend to see frail older people who are struggling with their independence, for example, I tend to see people who are in their late 70s, their 80s, for example, in that age right now. Again, the way to think about it is biologically, we know our bodies start to get more negatively impacted by aging from onwards, 55 onwards. So that's where we want to start thinking about a lot of the things that I talked about. But again, doing these things even at younger ages will help us to lead healthier and active lives.
Terrific. All right, on to the next one then. Regarding memory and thyroid, most doctors will not treat high THS and normal T4. Do you agree with this approach?
Yeah, so again, this is a great question about, so TSH is what we call our thyroid stimulating hormone. And it's something that we'll screen as physicians, over time, because we know a lot of people are living with thyroid disorders. Now, again, sometimes you'll have a TSH level done, and it'll be higher than the average range. It might be, say, for example, if the upper range is around 5, you might have a TSH level of, say, 7 or 8, and people are like, oh gosh, so does that mean I need to take thyroid supplementation? Long ago, we used to say, absolutely, let's get you some thyroid supplementation to bring you back into that normal level. But the person who asked that question said, oh, but I have a normal T4 or T3. T4 and T3 are measures of actual thyroid levels in your blood, for example, and not what we call the thyroid stimulating hormone. If those are normal and your TSH is a little bit elevated, we probably will not recommend treating anything because, again, this could be what we call subacute hypothyroidism hypothyroidism. So we really only want to treat people, A, who have symptoms, or B, we're seeing abnormalities with their actual thyroid levels. So a slightly abnormal TSH, we don't recommend treating now. But again, this is what you want to have a chat with your primary care provider and say, why are we treating this, or why are we not treating this? Again, if you ever have questions, feel free to ask so that you can get the answers and appreciate what the approach is. And sometimes the best approach is to do nothing and just watch.
Once again, thank you. I believe this next question actually comes from the question we just asked. Someone said, would menopause be one of these factors?
And I'm not sure a factor of what, but basically
regarding memory and thyroid, I believe.
Yeah, so I think no, I think menopause, think of it completely separately. So don't think of it as related to thyroid, don't think of it related to memory or cognition. Just realize that as we get older, especially for women, for example, menopause is a period where there are hormonal changes that can happen. And that actually is part of the reason why women are more likely to experience thinning of their bones at a more accelerated pace in older age, because that estrogen is one of those natural hormones that helps to strengthen bones, for example. That's why one of the actual, that's why some of the treatments for people with brittle bone disease can actually be a more hormonal therapy as well. So it's important to think that with menopause should come more proactive thinking about women and maintaining their bone health in particular, but it certainly doesn't influence kind of a lot of other health conditions, for example. And certainly if people are significantly suffering with symptoms, again, we ask them to see their primary care provider, because sometimes there are different approaches that can help them alleviate some of their symptoms as well.
Thank you once again. Does sense loss also impact our brain?
Absolutely. So again, if you're actually not seeing well, right? If you're not hearing well, imagine this, your brain relies on the inputs that it's getting. So whenever you put your hands or your feet down on the ground, for example, you know, those little nerves that you have are sensory, and they're telling your brain, okay, your hands are on the table, you know, or for example, this is what I'm seeing, or this is what I'm hearing, and it helps you react and interact better with the world around you. So certainly, for example, if you are not hearing or seeing or touching things, you know, in the normal way, for example, that can impact the sensory input you have in the brain, and that can actually increase your risk of acute confusional states called delirium, or certainly increase the risk of developing a dementia. That's why we talk about hearing loss being one of those things that we recommend treating, because again, if someone can't hear properly, that can really affect their ability to listen, understand, to comprehend things well, and to communicate effectively with others.
All right, thank you. This person said, can you please repeat what decreased feelings in fingers and toes could be related to? Possibly a vitamin deficiency? Thank you.
Yeah, so again, when we talk about decreased fingers and toes, it could be something called a peripheral neuropathy. So neuro means kind of the neurons or the nerves, for example, and it might just mean that there's something wrong with the nerves, for example. And there could be a whole bunch of different reasons for that. It could be due to diabetes, for example, it could be to your thyroid, it can be due to B12 deficiency. There's a whole bunch of different things. Or sometimes it's just something that happens to some people as they age, and we're not even sure why. So again, if you're ever having things like this, it's good to again, talk to your doctor or your primary care provider, because they may be able to help you kind of investigate that and better understand if there are things you can do to feel better that way.
Great. All right. The next question was here. What about diminished reflexes? Might that not cause delayed reactions?
Yeah. So again, if your reflexes are you know kind of diminished with over time, for example, it might mean that you might have some aspects of delayed reactions and so on. So again, if you're worried that your reflexes are not functioning as well as they should, for example, I don't usually see people coming in and talking about their reflexes, but again, if it's something that you're worried about, for example, then certainly one can talk about that as well. And sometimes you're going to see real problems with people's reflexes or their tone or other aspects when they might have a neurological condition, for example. And that's why things like dementia can affect our ability to drive well, because they can sometimes decrease our ability to respond effectively if there's something urgent that we need to kind of maneuver. Again, you have to think about it, you've got to maneuver, and if you have diminished response times, that can be a problem as well. But sometimes you see that more with a neurological condition.
Okay. Next one here is, what are your thoughts on intermediate fasting?
You know what? There's all these different kind of ideas out there. I don't really think there's a strategy. I really honestly feel it's just about thinking about the diet that you're eating, and how are you trying to maintain a balanced diet, and that I don't think there's any quick weight loss strategies in that. I think it's really talking to your primary care provider, maybe meeting with a dietitian, finding out what are your health goals or what are your opportunities. And I think just eating a well-balanced diet, for example, I think that's the best strategy as opposed to intermittent fasting. I do, Deborah, see there's one question that did come up. There's what is the so a lot of people are asking what's the normal blood pressure, and then other people are asking about, for example, when would I see a geriatrician? So I want to answer those two questions first because there's a lot coming in.
By all means.
So one is what's a normal blood pressure, right? So my view is, again, if you're doing your blood pressure, I would say focus on the upper number in particular. The upper number is what we call the systolic number, and then the bottom number is called the diastolic number. Basically, my thinking is that between 120 to 150 is actually a normal number. And people say, oh, my blood pressure changes all the time. Absolutely. You take it now, you take it 5 minutes from now, it changes. But if you're the average number, the average upper number is between 120 to 150, you're doing well. If it's higher than that, you probably need to be on blood pressure agents or a higher dose of agents. If it's lower than that 120, you might be on too much medication and your doctor might want to help pull back with you on that. And I certainly do both with my patients. The bottom number, for example, I only really get concerned when that number starts creeping above 100. So that number is creeping above 100, then you might want to be concerned. So that's how you think about normal blood pressure, but just think of the upper number between 120 to 150. And there's some exceptions to that rule. And then when would I see a geriatrician, right? So number one is everyone out there should have a primary care provider. It could be a nurse practitioner, it could be a family doctor. If you do not have a doctor, then you are literally trying to fly solo on your own. Not a good idea, because when you run into trouble, you want there to be someone in your corner. And my advice is always try and find a doctor, who might be working as part of a primary care group or team, because they'll have other doctors who can cover for them. For example, they might be working with nurse practitioners, they might be working with therapists and social workers and dietitians and other people. So as an older person, try and find someone who's working as part of a team. And then when do they consult a geriatrician? Well, they'll consult a geriatrician or a geriatric psychiatrist when they might have an older person that they need a little bit more help with. They might say, look, I'm really worried about all these medications this person's on, or how do I manage these multiple chronic conditions, or I'm worried, could this be dementia? Like, what could things be going on? These are the things that when primary care doctors are referring to me, they're referring because there are issues at play. As a geriatrician, we don't do primary care. We're specialists working with primary care providers. So we always encourage people to find a primary care provider, work with them. And certainly they will often get in touch with us if we could be of additional use to help answer questions and provide support to people as they age.
Terrific. Now, how are you for time? Are you okay for a few more questions?
I think I can take one more question because I do have a call that starts in literally 1 minute.
All right. This person here said, I've been told that any alcohol, even in moderation, increases your risk for breast cancer. How do you reconcile that with the Blue Zone study?
I honestly think that I haven't heard that alcohol period increases your risk of breast cancer. I think, again, too much of anything. Smoking, for example, absolutely. I think a higher amount of alcohol. So for having a sip here or there, or having a glass of wine every once in a while, I don't think that really does increase significantly, especially if you end up being miserable for like 20 or 30 years because you can't have that drink, for example, that you like, then that's no way to end. That's no way to kind of live, especially if you're worried about breast cancer. If you're worried about breast cancer, for example, again, speak to your doctor to make sure you're doing your regular screenings, and doing those sorts of things as well.
Wonderful. Well, before I give you over to Mary, I want to thank you personally. Now I'm going to think of your voice on that extra kilometer that I'm running every day. And when I want to stop, I'll keep going. So thank you on behalf of both the Life and also to, of course, the Raymond Chang School of Continuing Education. And I'll now pass you over to Mary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again to Dr. Samir Sinha for an incredibly insightful presentation on healthy aging. Thank you also, Deborah Bonk-Greenwood and the Life Institute. And thank you everyone for attending today's workshop. I'm sure some of you are planning to attend some of our other workshops and programs. The contact information has been entered into the comment box, and we'll also be sending out a follow-up email with this information, as well as a recording of today's session and a survey within 24 to 48 hours. We really encourage you to fill out your survey, which will help us with future programming. As Dr. Sinha mentioned earlier, this is the final installment of Medical Mondays and wraps up our month-long of Healthy Aging lectures for June Seniors Month. We will be taking a short break to prepare for the fall term, as well as brand new community engagement programming that we'll be launching in September. If you have any questions, please reach out to us by email, either at programs50plus@ryerson.ca or info@thelifeinstitute.ca. On behalf of the Chang School at Ryerson University and our guest presenter today, Dr. Samir K. Sinha, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you have a very enjoyable and safe summer, and we look forward to welcoming you back again in September. Thank you, Dr. Sinha, and thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks
All
for
right,
having me.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.